will depend on the athletes too. Will some athletes show it more than the others?
It would depend on the athlete, what the goals for the program and where they are at the moment, right? Some athletes might be having a really good day and they're at a point in the program where I don't care. Like I don't care that they're having a great day.
Welcome, Spencer, to Evidence Strong Show. It's my pleasure to have you. If you could briefly introduce yourself.
Spencer Arnold, I guess briefly, I'm the CEO, founder, head coach, whatever word you want to use for Power and Grace Performance. I'm also the strength and conditioning director at Hebron Christian Academy, both based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Really long history, shortened. I love weightlifting. I've been weightlifting since I was a kid. Started weightlifting to try and be good at sports and potentially put a little size on. And then one thing led to another, and I found myself being like really consumed and obsessed with weightlifting. I was much better at weightlifting than I ever was in the sports. And so because of that, like I deep dove into weightlifting, and that like deep dive into weightlifting led to a really broad understanding of strength conditioning and has led me to the places that I am in. I'm lucky enough to be married to the most supportive woman in the world who has let me like run all of this craziness down. We've got 3 little kids. And so most of my life is spent legitimately running from one crazy thing to the next, trying to do my best to be a really good husband, really good dad, and like somehow along the way make people really strong and fit. So that's me kind of in a nutshell. Been doing this for a really long time. I think at this point it feels like longer than it has been, but really love weightlifting. And I personally have really loved the last like 5 years of strength and conditioning, where technology has become readily available and useful in what we do, so that these like figments of my dreams or things that I read about in manuals from the 1980s can be reality. And so that's kind of where I am and what I'm doing.
Okay, I invited you because I had a chat with Jake, your chief scientist on the team.
Yeah, smarter than any man I know.
So we thought it would be nice to, because I asked him a little bit about scientists working with coaches and how it works out in your team. So we thought it would be good to have your point of view as a head coach too. So I think we should start maybe with describing how your role looks like and maybe how your day-to-day looks like, so people can get the idea how you operate.
Yeah, so my day-to-day is not normal. I'm an obsessive person. So like most of my life is like weirdly organized down to the minute and the hour, like kind of all the way through my life is that way. So I get up very, very early, way before anybody should get up. I get up at 3:30 in the morning. I love the morning times, but that's like my time to read and like meditate and research, and that all that kind of happens then. Then I come to the high school. The high school I'm in charge of all of the sports, physical and strength and conditioning for every sports athlete at this school. So between middle school and high school, that lands me somewhere around 500 athletes. We're really lucky that they've been like the school has invested in us with a lot of technology. So we have velocity-based training systems in every station. So all 16 stations, there's velocity-based training systems. So we're gathering that data. We also have GPS devices that we put on all of our major athletes. And so we're collecting their GPS like biometric data. And then I have a team of people here at the school who crunch that data for me. I kind of give them direction and like what we need. They crunch that data for me, and then us together will produce reports that help us like track the athlete's progress in the weight room and on the field. We do all of that. And then I leave here and I go to Power and Grace. So I leave here about 3:15. I go over there and I coach sort of Olympic level athletes for Olympic weightlifting. At that place, at my gym, we have them kind of run through their workout. We do daily readiness testing on our jump mat. And so we're getting like a sort of a rolling average of their counter movement jump. And that's kind of giving us daily readiness tests, essentially. Also, Jake has set up a protocol for us to do some force plate testing that gives us far more data than the jump mat, right? And so we use our force plates to look at all the other biometric, whether that's impulse or peak force or whatever, through that. And then my role really in both scenarios is to sort of guide and direct, oversee program design. With the weightlifters, like I write their programs. With the students at the school, I'm in charge of in-season demands. So any athlete that is in season, I'm really hands-on on their program and controlling their program and looking at their readiness and making sure that we're progressing in certain metrics in the right way throughout season. My assistants, I have 2 assistants. They are sort of helping me run the room and also handling off-season programming for most of our other sports to make sure that we're getting kind of the strength development that we need in an off-season for a high school or middle school athlete. At Power and Grace, Grace. I like write the program. I coached them on the floor. It got to a point, I don't know, maybe, probably 3 years ago now, that I realized that like I was just leaving a lot of information out there. And I knew it was out there, and I knew there was information that we needed to gather to help really inform the program choices and any regulations choices we were making in our program day to day, and just like evaluation of results, mesocycle to mesocycle and macrocycle to macrocycle. I just knew that we weren't doing a really great job of that. And so Jake Slaton and I go way back, like high school days when he was in high school. And so I knew that was a guy that understood weightlifting. He was a weightlifter. He also had studied and learned under some of the best coaches in the world for sports science. So I went and got him, and he helps me see what I can't see, basically. Like his job and what he crushes is to collect the data from all the different metrics all the different devices that we're using, whether that's perch for our velocity-based training, whether that's for our force plates involved, whatever, or jump mat data. He takes all that information and crunches it and begins to look for trends and look for like bona fide real data that can actually help inform the programming choices and the coaching choices that we make. And so my role is to be hands-on on the field of play, like pressing our athletes to be better, working with their technical model, working with certain technical things that we're trying to fix, and then writing overall programs for them to help us push towards whatever that goal is. Jake's job is to come behind me and help me see that progress through the lens of like objective data. And that's kind of how my role with him, and particularly my role in Power and Grace, works. And that's why I think it's working so well.
Awesome.
This is a crazy thing to say, but this is the first year we've had consistent data collection of metrics that we knew that mattered. So in 2022, we were collecting data, but we were trying to figure out like what mattered and what was just noise, and what we could like just look like we did depth drop stuff and we didn't really like that. We looked at RSI, we didn't think that was really helpful. So like we're like pulling stuff away that we didn't think was helpful. And so in 2023, like that was the first year that we collected data in a manner with a manner that was consistent, and looked at the same thing for the course of a year. And so really we got to the end of 2023, and that was the first time that we can look and go, okay, like what trends do we see over the last year?
So that's useful to remember that all the data is useful, but the most important is the big picture. And that's what we have to worry about the most.
Yeah, that absolutely would be. There's so many people want to look at one metric. Like it's easy to look at counter movement jump. So you would look at counter movement jump and be like, man, you guys crushed it. Like just keep doing what you're doing. Well, no offense, like whoever that person is, if they were to say that to me, I would say no offense, but like you can't afford to answer the question with just keep doing what you're doing when you're talking about Olympic hopefuls. Like that can't be your answer, because keep doing what you're doing isn't enough. You're not going to be the best in the world by quote, keep doing what you're doing. You got to keep doing what you're doing that's right, but you got to find what you're doing that's not right, because I don't care who you are. You're doing something that's wrong. Like I guarantee it. Like nobody's doing it perfectly right. There's something wrong. So you got to find what that wrong thing is. And that means looking at more than one piece of data and more than one like continued set of data over the course of time, and then pinpointing what's not great, then making a hypothesis about that and finding out if I shift this, does it change the trend in that or not? And that, what people think is like, that's not going to happen in a week. You're not going to see a shift probably in the change of that in 3 weeks. Like that's going to take 12, 16 weeks for you to see any real measured change in that. And that's a long time to be devoted to collecting the same piece of data. But that's like what people don't realize about sports science is 80% of it is the collection of really boring data. That's like you do the 80% to like find the jewel in the 20%, you know?
All right. Could we go a little bit into the details of what data you collect and how often?
Yeah.
I know that there's more than you and Jake involved in data collection. Am I right?
Yeah. So at Power and Grace, Jake does all the data collection for the force plates. So we do that once a week. So every Saturday, our athletes will complete a force plate testing protocol with Jake. That varies from, squat jumps to counter movement jumps to all kinds of different jumping. The protocol itself takes about 5 minutes. So it's not very extensive. It used to be way more extensive, right? Like we're loading the barbell, then we're loading 50%. We're doing all this stuff. And over the course of time, like I said, like he started to like remove the noise and pull away what doesn't matter, like shift that protocol down to we're just doing like 5 minutes of testing. I'm sure now he's got some ideas, as scientists always do, like what if we tried this? And so I'm sure there'll be something we try in 2024 and we'll see if it works. But that's like once a week we're on the force plate. That's it. We don't do it every day. One, like they're kind of a pain to set up. Two, it hasn't been necessary to have that data every day. And three, like it's a major inconvenience to an athlete to have to wait 20 minutes to start their workout because 3 people are ahead of them in the force plate testing, And so Just on our force plates, where Jake measures like 5 or 6 different things. The ones that we care a lot about concentric force, but both and obviously in peak force, we care a ton about that. We also care about eccentric impulse. So put that lightly, the way we use that is like, can that person like change directions quickly? Can they put the brakes on and change directions quickly? So in our counter movement jump, can I go down and go back the other way quickly? Or is that like a slow labored change of direction? We care a ton about that. What we tend to see, and this is kind of fun, is trends wise, is somebody with a high eccentric impulse tends to not have a big power output, right? Like those two things don't tend to go hand in hand. What we've seen is like somebody will compensate for low eccentric impulse with big power, right? So this big, huge force output, big, huge force output, and create this big jump because they just create massive amounts of force. And somebody with a high eccentric impulse will like use that stretch shortening and like change the direction really quickly to create that same height. So we look at both of those because that informs like us what kind of athlete is standing in front of us. And for me, that tells me a ton about how I'm going to teach them to jerk, right? Am I going to get this big labored, big dip, big drive? Well, let me see what the athlete's like. Or am I going to get this like quick dip, use the oscillation of the bar, make the bar fly fast? Well, again, I'll learn a little bit based on that force plate testing. We also test just eccentric force in general, their ability to absorb force in an eccentric load. And then obviously we test concentric impulse and concentric force. Those are the big 5 I think we're looking at. We haven't played with difference bilateral or unilaterally yet, which we do have unilateral plates, which we haven't played with those. But those are the big 5. Jake could probably give you more. Those are the 5 that I know about. Let's put it that way. I'm sure there is more that he is looking at. Those are the 5 that he is like continually pushed in front of me as important. One of the way that works out is like if I have an athlete who is force dependent, right? They've got to be able to create big force peaks in order to be successful. I'm going to lean into force development. So you're going to see a little more strength bias programming, a lot more squatting, a lot more of that, a lot heavy pulling. If they're a little bit of a sort of an eccentric, like an impulse, like sort of a quick twitch type athlete and the force plate's giving us that, I'm going to lean a little bit more into plyometrics. You're going to see less dampening of them with heavy loads and a lot more like we're going to do power stuff to kind of help keep that twitchiness in there. A lot of that helps inform. And so a lot of times we'll finish a macro cycle and Jake and I will look at the data and we'll say like, hey, for this athlete, let's find a way to like be a little more power emphasis. For this athlete, let's be a little more force emphasis. And it informs how we set up the next macro cycle.
Awesome. So this is Saturday.
Yeah, that's just Saturday. Throughout every single day when they walk in, they're doing a counter movement jump. Our sports science assistant to Jake is Angela. Angela's in there every day running the protocols and the dashboard for our counter movement jump. Counter movement jump's exactly what you see. I mean, it's exactly what you think. It's no arms, hands on hips. They do one at like 50% as a warm up, and then they do 2 jumps. She punches in those numbers, and then that pushes to a dashboard for both of us to look at. That shows us the peak for the day, like how high was their jump for the day, and that shows up on a graphic that is giving me a standard derivative based on a rolling average every 12 days right now. So every 12 days, we're looking at like what their average counter movement jump is, and are they above the limit? Are they below the limit? Are they outside of what we would are they above what we consider normal based on number of standard deviations? Are they way below? And then I use that information to regulate the program for the day. They're kind of inside our normal state, like lower and upper limit. We're probably just going to do what we're doing. If I see that they're like, this is a good day, we're flying, I'll just keep that in the back of my mind and I'll watch. And if it does, like if my eyeballs match what the data is telling me, they may get a green light to push a couple of reps. So I may modify and take a rep away and let them go a little heavier or whatever. Same thing if it looks like it's low. Again, if I have eyes are watching them like, hey, because they look like they're bad today, we may pull the intensity down. I might pull the volume away depending on what the athlete's doing. So that happens every single day.
2 questions on that. One is why 12 days?
I think 12 days encompasses 2 weeks of training, right? So like that's going to give us 2 full weeks of training. And so I think that's why they selected 12. I think 1 week isn't enough. Like you can be tricked by 1 week, one really good week, and 2 weeks tends to tell us enough to be able to be comfortably assessing where they are for that day. If you had more than that, the chances of that really rolling in a way that is noticeable is so low because there's so much data in there that it would take a massive change to see that shift happen. And so 12 gives us enough data to rely on, and not short enough data it won't be impacted massively by 1 data point. And I think that's why we landed.
Okay, and the second question is how much in terms of percentage it has to be above or below for you to change the or to look for the change in programming for the day?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know the actual number of standard deviations that they've landed on. I think it's either 2 or 2.5. And basically all I do is if their jump is above that 2.5 standard deviations, which I think is what we landed on. Don't hold me to that. I look at that. Basically, I look at their counter movement jump as compared to their average. Then I look at that chart and see, is their counter movement for the day significantly above that standard deviation? If it's just above it at all, like if it is above the upper limit, that's it. Even if it, honestly, we're being real honest, if it's close to the upper limit, I'm going to go, okay, like this is a good day. If it's close or below the lower limit, I'm going to go, this is a bad day. Now, that isn't going to be my end all. Like I would warn anybody who would say, I looked at it and immediately changed the program based on their counter movement jump. Like it is not the end all. For me, it's just an informant. And so I will, if it is above or at that upper limit, then I will look at it. I'll watch their training a little more closely and be ready to make a modification should their performance match, should my eyeballs match what I saw on the counter movement data. But it isn't like an automatic for sure. I'm just trusting Jake and Angela to give me a really good representation of where they've been over the last 2 weeks when I look at that graph.
Will it depend on the athletes too? Will some athletes show it more than the others?
It would depend on the athlete, what the goals for the program and where they are at the moment, right? Some athletes might be having a really good day and they're at a point in the program where I don't care. Like I don't care that they're having a great day. The goal is, I mean, really truly, like the goal is completion because we're building work capacity and we're building volume and like sure, they have a really great day that day. And I can already hear the weightlifting purists like yelling at me like, oh, you got to take the lift. You got to take advantage. Like you got to max out when you have the juice. Like, no, you don't. You don't have to. You might think you have to, but you don't have to. And you can take advantage of the fact that they're in a really good place and they're going to do 10 really crisp, clean reps. And so for me, it depends a little bit on what the goal of the day is and the goal of the mesocycle is. Now, if we're getting out of general prep phase and starting to like get into specific prep and get into competition prep and they look good, like I'm going to let them go. Like I'm going to probably give them a green light to hit something that wasn't on the program because weightlifting, I'll tell you this, like this is non-sport science-y. This is like the art piece. Weightlifting at a high level, making really big lifts is far more of a skill than it is perfect amalgamation of the right data, the right intensities and volume. Like an athlete lifting and making consecutively loads that are above 97% or so, like that takes skill. That doesn't just take mental toughness. That doesn't just take preparation. Like that takes a skill, like a mental skill and just like practice of skill. So if I get out of general prep and I start getting within 8 weeks or so of competition and they look good, I mean, I'm going to let them go for it. And that's not athlete dependent. That's just like weightlifting dependent, you know? It's funny because like in strength and conditioning world, the goal is for an athlete to come in and be competent and capable enough to do the program, right? You don't want them doing more than the program because that's not the goal, right? The goal is for them to go do awesome in baseball or football or whatever. And so you do readiness tests in strength and conditioning to make sure that the program isn't too much. In weightlifting, you do readiness tests to see if they have the ability to do more, right? Or if the program is too much that day. It goes both ways in weightlifting. In strength and conditioning, it stops at, can we do the program? Not, can we do more than the program, you know? And so for me, it has less to do with the athlete and more to do with like where they are in the program and the goal of the program. That said, there are certain athletes that I've noticed that even if the counter movement jump is telling me to go and my eyeballs are telling me that they need to go, that program they've somehow locked into that program and going more than what's written on this paper will somehow like, it's just tough for them mentally to do more than what is written. They've prepared themselves mentally to do what is written. And so I won't give them a green light. Generally, I'll just write their program a little more aggressively and the counter movement and my eyeballs will tell me to pull back from that. And so I'll pull back from the program rather than push them above it. So a lot of that informs like how I write the program. But for me, the goal for the mesocycle will always win, right? If the goal is to build work capacity and get better technically, then we're going to do that no matter what, right? Like the goal is to chase the goal, not to go chase the goal that's supposed to be the goal in 8 weeks. Chase the goal for now. And if you're in a really good shape and you're moving really well that day, that means that you're going to get better work capacity because you're going to move cleaner, more efficient, and you're going to get better reps built into your kinesthetic understanding of the lift because you're more prepared to do that.
Awesome. So you do Saturday post plates every day, jump height?
Readiness testing. And then, sorry, that's a great, I said,
is it, because I kind of inflicted it on you. Is it the height you're looking for or somehow like that?
Yeah, we used to do flight time. We used to do ground contact time and put all that together for a relative strength index, but we don't do that anymore. We didn't find it as useful and it certainly wasn't as indicative performance for us. So we literally just do flight or height on the counter movement jump. Yeah. But that also, like we also use velocity-based training. So we're collecting the speed of their pulls and the speed of their squat and all of the things they do. We don't do velocity parameters or concerns for the lifts because quite frankly, generally velocity lies to you when you're doing the lifts. I've seen more people miss weights that moved faster than I've seen people make weights that move faster, right? Like it's easy to make a bar move really fast the wrong way. It's hard to make a bar move the right way, period. So like just we care far more than like the technique trumps the speed in the lifts. But for the pulls and for the squats, we're measuring velocity and we're using that data to help inform weight selection and just to drive intent a little bit. I think those are the three major things that we do from a data collection standpoint, other than like all the crap we collect from their program, right? How many reps, how heavy, how much tonnage, that kind of stuff.
So for velocity, do you look at the data then later to see other things?
Yeah, both and, right? So obviously we look at it in real time because I think that real time adjustment for them drives performance. But then similarly, I go back and look at it and you can see trends over time, right? Am I getting, what's my time to peak velocity? Is it increasing, right? So that would be indicative of rate of force development if I'm able to get to peak velocity faster. And am I seeing that sort of trend increase? And then Jake uses a lot of that to help overlay that with his force work so that he can see is our squatting, if they're squatting in velocity increasing, like am I moving 85% today faster than I was moving 85% 4 weeks ago? And does that trend match with other data that he's collecting so he can see some stuff that overlays and basically are they affirming each other, right? If he uses the velocity data and the force data to make sure and see if we're just not having this outlier and trying to base our whole program off of something that doesn't match with any of the other data we're collecting. So it's
kind of validation
together. Yeah, validation. That's the word I was looking for. Like it does help validate the whole picture, like the whole puzzle, rather than just looking at one piece and saying that's a giraffe.
That's so interesting. So not only you narrow down the variables you're looking at, but you also introduce the double checking system so you can make sure that what you're measuring and what you're getting is actually what's happening, because that's another problem with technology. I think that we can measure stuff, but is it really true what we are measuring and seeing? And that's another question. So yeah, that's awesome. Okay. And then when you're looking at the data, I'm asking about the big picture and kind of making decisions long term. Is it every mesocycle?
Yeah, every mesocycle, Jake gives me athlete reports. And so I get athlete reports every 4 weeks or so. Obviously the readiness data I'm looking at every day, but I'm not making major decisions off of one day, but every 4 weeks or so, because I shift my focus and I shift my exercise selection every mesocycle. So he'll give me athlete reports every mesocycle. And those conversations last like 3 or 4 minutes. Like it's not real extensive. We're not changing the world around because of 4 weeks of training, but it does like affirm or not affirm to what we did last cycle work. And do we want to keep doing that or we not, right? And I've got thousands of examples of times where like he said, hey, this is working, look at this, or hey, that isn't working, we need to change your progression there, your protocol for that. But the big conversation happens at the end of every macro cycle. So once we get post-competition and we're getting ready to write the next macro cycle and look at the big picture and write the goals and that kind of stuff, that's when the big conversation happens, and we'll look at that data collection over the last 16, 14, 12, 17 weeks, whatever it was, and see the big picture then. So generally every meso, and then at the end of every macro, we get together and look at it.
Do you do any athlete profiling, like psychological testing?
Yeah, we do. Not anything crazy. Most of our high-level athletes do have a sports psychologist. And so in a lot of ways, like, again, I'm a big refer out. Like the reason we have a sports scientist is because I'm not one. The reason we have a registered dietitian is because I'm not one. The reason we have a sports psychologist is because I'm not one. We do some initial testing and not necessarily like personality testing, right? Like I'm less concerned with personality. I am more concerned with their response to stress. Mm-hmm. And so we'll use the DISC profile for that, because that DISC profile will tell me, hey, what motivates them and what doesn't, how do they respond when they win or lose. Like it gives me more of like responses and motivations rather than like, oh, they're bubbly or they're social or they're not social. Like who cares? I do care.
You can also see it. If you are on the floor, you will know it.
Right. But what that tells me, if a new athlete comes in, I have one athlete and they're getting ready to do a big jerk and I tell them like, there's no way you're going to be able to make that. One athlete on the one hand be like, middle finger out, watch me prove you wrong. Another athlete's going to believe me and miss it. I don't want to find that out the hard way. Like I want to know ahead of time, like they're motivated by affirmation words, and like the reason they're working is to like feel like they're in a partnership with you to go accomplish this goal. And if you don't believe in them, they're not going to go do it. And then you got this other one who's like, I'm going to win no matter what. I don't care who you are. I don't care who gets in my way. I'm going to win no matter what. Well, those people I can like push on and they're going to go prove me wrong, right? I want to know that ahead of time. So we do some profiling in a sense, like I want to know how they respond to stress and how they respond, and what motivates them and what do they hate, well, that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's super interesting to me. I think that's a little bit like I've done 2 or 3 years of studying in that world and got some certifications done in that world, and that's some stuff that I think can be the like X factor. If you don't, like, you can have all the sports science in the world, but if you don't get the human piece right, it doesn't matter. So I think that again, that helps build the whole picture of like what's a whole program look like, what's a whole team of coaches look like that work together for one athlete's success. Like that's one really big element.
How many coaches you have for personnel or team? How big is a team behind one athlete in power?
Behind one athlete, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 coaches will help like form the full bubble around one athlete. So 2 sports scientists, me as the personal coach, you got a dietitian, you got a psychologist, and you have a physical therapist of sorts.
Do you have all these people in the gym?
So in the gym, we have a sports scientist and we have the physical therapist. The dietitian is remote, the psychologist is remote, and obviously I'm there in person. So the 3 that are remote are the dietitian and the psychologist are both remote. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, it's in person.
But everybody else is there. Yeah, everybody's there. And it's funny because the psychologist and the dietitian will travel with them to competition. So they're there in person in competition.
Okay, a vague question for you to riff off. You spoke about it through our conversation a little bit, but how much what you're doing, you know what you're doing, how much of it is guessing?
Well, I would like to believe that as we do this more, it's less guessing. I will tell you that in 2022, when we started doing all this, 90% of it was guessing, right? 10% was what we had seen in other people or heard from other programs or research articles that we read that were verified. But in practice, like we just didn't have any experience. We didn't have any data. We didn't know what we were looking at. And nobody, no offense to the fitness community, like nobody has collected the amount of data we've collected on elite female weightlifters. Like nobody in the world has collected that amount of force data the way we've collected it inside of like the controlled environment that we've connected it. And so like to some degree, like we were paving our own road. And so we were guessing in a lot of ways. Now, as we've gotten better, that guessing has gotten down to 70 and then 60 and 50%, right? I think I'll tell you this, when we're not guessing, we find ways to guess. I think that's a fact. Like when we get to a place where we really feel really confident about something and we can bank on it and believe it and use it, we find something else that we got to guess on. And so we're never not guessing. That's just a fact. Like that's science, is looking at data that you don't understand and trying to make assumptions and assertions that you don't really know are true and then trying to prove them right and find out that they're wrong. Like that's it. So I would say that now at this point, like 70% of what we do is validated and confirmed, and about 30% of what we're doing is a new idea or something we don't necessarily understand, or we're like looking at it and like I just told you, like, okay, so this peak force went up, but her impulse went down. What happened here? Well, I'm going to make a guess. And we're going to see if it's right. But we've gotten to the point where like now about 70% of what we do is verifiable and validated and done in a way that we can trust it. And about 30% of it is a guess.
Will you publish the data you're collecting at some point?
Yeah. Yes, we will. I'm not sure when. Jake doesn't have any time. Like I don't have any time. Like I'm sure there will be a day where he and I like can breathe for a second, like probably when the Olympics is over, and like take that data and decide what's publishable and start through the process of getting it peer reviewed and publish that data. Yeah. I just don't want to publish it. I'm, again, obsessive compulsive and pretty avidly against publishing data that's not reviewed. I'm just not going to publish a blog with a bunch of data in it because you can't use it. You can't trust it. I want other people to look at our work and tell us if it's usable and trustable. And so when we do it, we'll go through it's a much more lengthy process. We'll probably bring a couple people in and publish it. Yeah.
Okay. I have 2 more questions from Evidence Strong Patreon community, so I will just read them so I make them justice. The first one is, what in your opinion are the top 3 data variable a coach can collect?
Yeah, so that's easy. And I say this in all love. Like the top 3 data variables a coach can collect have nothing to do with technology. It's not a jump. It's not a force output. It's none of that. The number one thing that they can collect is, like in my opinion, is the course of history of an athlete's performance. Like just collect that first and see, like from the first competition you coached them to the next, to the next, to the next, what trends you see in their competition history. For everything from the number of makes to number of misses, what are their openers trending upward? And if their openers are trending upward and their makes are trending upward at the same time, what does that tell you about, are you opening too heavy? Like the first thing is just like take their competition history and look and see what trends you see in competition history, number of makes, number of misses, opening weights, body weight class. Like that, I think, can tell you so much about an athlete and how they compete, because ultimately the game here isn't to create really great jumpers, right? Like the goal is to make really great weightlifters. Well, that means competition. So the first thing I'd say is like just look at basic competition history. You don't need anything but a computer and a piece of paper to do that. Second thing I'd say is this training variables. Like you can't, if you're looking at external factors like a counter movement jump without looking at what's causing those things, you're backwards. You're wondering about the color of the house if we've built the foundation. And so in my mind, like tracking the basic metrics, like what's the number of reps they're completing per session, per week, per mesocycle, right? What's the overall relative intensity for each session, for each mesocycle? What's the tonnage? What's the peak intensity that they're hitting each session in each cycle? Like collect that data first. And again, don't do anything with it. Just like plot it and look at it and look at the trend lines and see what that data can tell you, because you can't make measured change to a program based on other factors if you don't have that starting point. And so that would be for me, like just basic training metrics. And then thirdly, I would just say the counter movement jump. If you can have those three things, competition history, basic training metrics, and then a counter movement jump, those, they work in reverse order, right? Like what's the most important thing? Our competition history, right? So if we're not seeing the trend we want to see in competition history, well, then you have to ask the question, like, what am I programming, right? That is not allowing that to happen. Well, if you can't answer that question because you don't have a verified collection of data through your program, then you can't answer the question. So like competition history should push you to understand your program design. Well, then your counter movement jump, let's say you have the counter movement jump and you're noticing that the trend in the wrong direction of the counter movement jump, same thing. Like, okay, if my counter movement jump going down, but my competition history is going up, okay, now we have to ask the question, is there something wrong with the way that I'm doing the counter movement jump? Or is it really indicative of performance? And so they just have to be in that order for me, like competition history, training data, then counter movement jump, or whatever force jumping data you want to collect. Those are the three that I would say are the most important. Counter movement jump, basically, because it's the easiest to collect. Yeah.
And you mean height?
Yes, counter movement jump height. Yes. Arms fixed. Don't let them use momentum.
Yes, thank you. Is there anything I didn't ask about but you think it's important to mention?
Yeah. And I would say probably the thing that most sports scientists don't want to hear me say is sports science, and the scientist is only as good as the relationship you have with the athlete that you're coaching. If they don't believe that doing force plate testing every Saturday matters, they're just not going to care, and then you're not going to get good data. The athlete-coach relationship is the very foundational, like basement level work that allows sports science to be effective. So spend your time doing that, like developing good relationships with your athletes, because all of the data you collect is useless if the athlete doesn't believe it matters or believes you're just using them so that you can do some cool testing, right? So I would tell people, before you ever worry about any of that, be a good human, care about your athletes, make sure your athletes aren't a means to an end for you, but they are the end. Like they are the most important thing. They aren't the means to the most important thing. And so really, really care about that. And then you can build on that with data collection and sports science. But sports science and data collection is null and void without a really good athlete coach team that is partnering together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Your favorite color?
Oh, yes, red. No doubt. 100%. Graduated from the University of Georgia. They're red. I love red. I probably should say white because then we want white lights, but white's boring. Red. Yeah. Red. No doubt.
All right. And if people want to contact you, find more about your work, where they should go on the internet?
Yeah, there's a lot of places. I'll just tell you that if you're looking for stuff that like is going to be indicative of what we talked about today, go to Power and Grace Performance's Instagram, or which is at Power and Grace Performance, or www.powergraceperformance.com. We have a blog there that Jake writes a lot on and I write a lot on. Those are the two best places. Also easy to contact me is Spencer at powerandgraceperformance.com. Email me. I'm about 80% at responding to them. So if you're doing the 20%, I'm sorry, just maybe email me again. If you're looking for content that has nothing to do with weightlifting, that's like me reposting weightlifting, but also maybe me like talking about recipes or something, that my personal Instagram is Spencer G. Arnold, Twitter Spencer G. Arnold. But best places if you're looking for content like this is just anything and everything Power and Grace Performance, for sure.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks.